Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're tackling the Marshall Plan. And, it's a topic I've always found fascinating. I'm really excited to dig into this Wikipedia article with you.
Yeah, it's one of those historical turning points with ripples we still feel today, It's more than just history. It's about understanding the world we live in now.
Totally. So, to set the scene, the Marshall Plan comes after World War II. What was the situation in Europe that made this plan necessary?
Well, just imagine it. Like, Europe was devastated. I mean, truly devastated. Cities were rubble. Industries were, just gone. It wasn't just about rebuilding. It was about basic survival.
Yeah, the Wikipedia article mentioned something about agricultural production being way down.
Oh, yeah. By 1947, agricultural production was only at 83% of what it had been back in 38. People were struggling to get back on their feet, to even just, put food on the table.
Wow, so even basic food production was crippled.
Yeah.
That puts things in perspective.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just the farms. Transportation networks were shattered. Imagine, railways, bridges, all in ruins. Trade and commerce, everything was disrupted.
It's hard to even fathom that level of, I don't know, just complete disruption.
Right. It was a whole system in shock. And, on top of the physical devastation, there were severe shortages of basic necessities. Food, fuel, medicine, you name it.
And that winter of 1946 going into 47, I read it was brutal.
Brutally cold, and the shortages just made everything worse, like widespread hunger, unrest. It was a very real possibility that Europe could, just completely collapse.
It sounds incredibly bleak. Okay, so we have Europe on the brink. But on the other side of the Atlantic, the U.S. and Canada come out of the war in a very different state.
Oh, totally different. They were practically untouched by comparison. Their economies were not only intact, but actually booming because of the war effort.
So you have this situation where you have the U.S., this economic powerhouse, and then a devastated Europe, and that's where the Marshall Plan comes in.
You could say it's this big, bold idea to help get Europe back on its feet. But, it's important to remember the U.S. was already involved in providing aid before the Marshall Plan. Remember those images of refugee camps?
Right, right. So what made the Marshall Plan different? Was it just more money or?
That's where things get really interesting. It was a huge shift in strategy. The Marshall Plan was bolder, way more ambitious. It wasn't just about immediate relief anymore, but about, shaping the future of Europe.
Okay, so what were the main goals? What made the Marshall Plan stand out from those earlier relief efforts?
It was about building something new, something arguably even better than before the war.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think of it this way. The Marshall Plan had these interwoven roles, rebuilding infrastructure, of course, but then also dismantling trade barriers within Europe, modernizing industries, boosting prosperity, and then, there was the elephant in the room.
The elephant in the room being?
Preventing the spread of communism.
Ah, right. The Wikipedia article mentions Stalin and the Soviet Union. Didn't things get a little tense on that front?
They did. And what's fascinating is that the Soviets and their allies were actually invited to be part of the Marshall Plan initially.
Wait, really? So Stalin could have been on board? What happened?
Well, from what we understand, he initially seemed open to the idea. The article even mentions his foreign minister, Molotov, being involved in those early negotiations.
Interesting. So what changed Stalin's mind?
It seems the turning point was realizing that the plan included aid to all of Germany, including Western Germany.
I see. So not just about rebuilding, but influencing the future of Europe.
Yeah.
And that's where Stalin drew the line.
Exactly. And that's when the story of the Marshall Plan gets tangled up with the Cold War. But we'll dive more into that in a bit.
This is already so fascinating. We've got a lot more to unpack, but let's take a quick pause and come back to dive into the details of how the Marshall Plan actually played out. Okay, so we're back and ready to dig into the nuts and bolts of the Marshall Plan. We talked about the dire situation in post-war Europe, but how much money are we actually talking about here? What did the U.S. actually spend?
Well, get this. The U.S. ended up transferring over $13 billion to Western Europe between 1948 and 1951.
$13 billion. Back then, that was what, like a gazillion dollars?
Pretty much. And adjusting for inflation, that's close to mind-boggling $174 billion in today's money.
Wow, that's a serious chunk of change. But did it work? Was it just a giant giveaway, or did it actually achieve what it set out to do?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's not a simple yes or no. Now, the Wikipedia article does highlight this pretty compelling statistic. By 1952, the economies of all the participating countries had actually bounced back beyond pre-war levels.
So, case closed. The Marshall Plan was a success.
Well, hold on a sec. While the Marshall Plan definitely played a huge role, it's a bit simplistic to say it single-handedly resurrected Europe.
Okay, so what else was going on?
A bunch of factors. I mean, you have the resilience of the European people, right? And then there were internal efforts within those countries, plus changes in the global market.
So the Marshall Plan was one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Imagine a company on the verge of bankruptcy. A huge influx of cash might be the lifeline it needs, but it doesn't guarantee success, you know? The company still needs to make smart decisions, restructure, adapt to the market.
Right, so it gives them a chance, but they still have to do the work.
Exactly. The Marshall Plan was that lifeline. It provided breathing room, but the real work of recovery came from within those European nations.
That makes a lot of sense. So it was more like a jumpstart for a stalled engine, not building a brand new engine from scratch.
Hmm.
But how did this jumpstart actually work? Was it just the U.S. handing out suitcases full of cash?
Not quite. It was way more nuanced than that. I mean, the people who designed the Marshall Plan, they were really keen on stimulating sustainable growth, not just throwing money at the problem.
Okay, so how did they do that?
Well, one of their key tools was something called counterpart funds.
Counterpart funds? That sounds intriguing. What are those?
So basically, instead of giving the aid directly to governments, a portion of it was used to create these funds, but in local currencies. And then these funds were invested in various reconstruction projects.
So it's like instead of just giving them the fish, you teach them to fish or something like that.
Kind of, yeah. It was about empowering European nations to take ownership of their own recovery.
And did it work?
It did. The Wikipedia article gives a good example. In Germany, these counterpart funds were huge in revitalizing their coal industry, which was essential for post-war reconstruction.
So not just a handout, but a way to jumpstart industry and grow from within. Clever.
Yeah.
But was it all about the money, or did the U.S. provide other forms of support as well?
Oh, the Marshall Plan was about way more than just money. It was about sharing knowledge, expertise, best practices, a real transfer of skills and ideas.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
They had this thing called the Technical Assistance Program.
Okay, I am definitely intrigued. Tell me more about this technical assistance program.
Imagine this. Thousands of European engineers, technicians, even business leaders, they were sent to the U.S. on these, massive learning expeditions.
Like a giant exchange program for the best minds in Europe.
Exactly. They toured American factories, saw firsthand how things were done, learned about all the latest advancements.
I bet those trips were pretty eye-opening for the Europeans, seeing how American industry operated.
Totally. It wasn't just about the technology either. It was about the whole system management techniques, labor relations, even things like marketing and consumer behavior.
Wow, so it was about modernizing their whole approach to industry.
Exactly. These participants went back to Europe with fresh perspectives, new skills, this renewed sense of possibility.
It's amazing to think about the long-term impact. But let's get back to something we touched on earlier, the Marshall Plan's role in containing communism. Did it actually make a difference?
That is the big question, right?
Mm.
And, like with a lot of historical debates, it's messy. It's hard to say for sure.
So the Wikipedia article doesn't give a definitive answer.
It acknowledges that it's complicated. It's almost impossible to draw a straight line from A to B and say, yep, the Marshall Plan single-handedly stopped communism.
Okay, but
But it's clear that the Marshall Plan was a major factor in stabilizing Western Europe, not just economically, but politically too. And as we were saying earlier, that stability likely played a huge role in making communism less appealing.
because a more prosperous and stable society is less likely to be drawn to radical ideologies.
Precisely. When people have hope, when they see a path to a better future within their own system, they're less likely to be swayed by promises of revolution.
So the Marshall Plan, it wasn't just about rebuilding economies. It was about rebuilding hope and faith in a democratic future.
Exactly. It was almost like a counter-narrative to the communist model. It was showing that there was another way, a better way. And that's something we'll explore further when we come back after a quick break.
All right, we're back. Now, before the break, we were talking about the Marshall Plan's impact on containing communism, this idea of it being a counter-narrative. But this Wikipedia article also dives into some other really interesting aspects of the plan. Like, there was a whole program dedicated to something called technical assistance, right?
Yeah, the Technical Assistance Program. It's one of those things that often gets overshadowed by the sheer amount of money involved in the Marshall Plan, but it was absolutely essential to its long-term success, you know?
Okay, so what was the thinking there? Why was this technical assistance program so important?
Well, it's pretty simple, really. Money alone can only rebuild so much. To truly recover, Europe needed knowledge, skills, innovation. That's what the Technical Assistance Program was all about.
So was it like sending American experts over to Europe to kind of like show them the ropes?
It was actually the other way around. They sent thousands of Europeans, engineers, technicians, even business leaders to the U.S.
Wow, so it was like a massive exchange program, but for like the best minds in Europe.
Exactly. And get this, the article mentions that France alone sent hundreds of missions with thousands of participants to the U.S. Can you imagine that? Thousands of people getting a firsthand look at American industry.
That must have been mind-blowing for those European participants, seeing how things were done in the U.S., especially after the war.
Absolutely. They toured factories, observed production lines, learned about the latest technologies, management techniques. I mean, it was a crash course in modern industry.
So it wasn't just about rebuilding what was destroyed, but about bringing European industry like up to speed with the latest advancements.
Exactly. And those participants, they didn't just go back to Europe with new ideas, they went back with a renewed sense of possibility. They were able to apply what they learned and really help transform European industry from the ground up.
That's amazing. It really shows the long-term vision behind the Marshall Plan, going beyond just the immediate crisis.
Absolutely. But speaking of long-term vision, we should circle back to the Marshall Plan's role in containing communism, something we touched on earlier. It really did have a lasting impact on the political landscape of Europe, shaping the future in ways few could have predicted.
It's incredible how events of this magnitude can have such far-reaching consequences, right?
It really makes you think about those ripple effects, and the Marshall Plan is a perfect example of how a seemingly impossible challenge rebuilding a war-torn continent can be tackled when nations come together with a shared purpose.
You know, that's a powerful message and a great note to wrap up our deep dive. The Marshall Plan, it wasn't just about money. It was about rebuilding hope, fostering collaboration, and ultimately shaping a more stable and prosperous future for Europe. So, to our listeners, whether you're history buffs or just curious about how the world works, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Marshall Plan. Until next time.